I'm currently getting over a cold, so I will try my absolute best to not be snotty on camera. But it's also the last day of the year, so happy New Year's Eve. And keeping with tradition, it is time to reflect on my favourite books that I've read over the past quarter. I'll link the videos on the books I did from the first, second, and third quarter in the description below. But in this video, I'm going to be talking to you about my favourite books I've read over the past quarter, which includes the months October, November, and December. All the books I've included here have been rated 4 stars and above, and I'm going to be listing them in order of preference. So stick around to the very end of the video to find out what was my favourite book from the last 3 months. But if you're new here, hi, welcome, I'm Katerina. I make videos about all things books, and if you haven't already, why not subscribe? Just a heads up that this is going to be a bit of a shorter video compared to my others because I actually didn't have that many favourites from the past quarter, but I am going to be talking at the very end about some of my reading habits I'm going to change going into the next year. But kicking off, my first favourite book that I read from the past quarter was Mary Ventura and the Ninth Kingdom by Sylvia Plath. We're keeping it short and sweet because this book in itself is incredibly short. It is literally like only 60 pages. And we follow a girl who, without really knowing why, her parents send her off on a train. And it's journeying towards a mysterious destination called the Ninth Kingdom. And along this journey, she becomes increasingly more unsettled as she realizes that something is amiss. And honestly, the less you know about the story, the better. I knew nothing going into it, and I ended up reading it 4 stars. And this was a surprise to me because I'm usually not a fan of short stories. I usually find that short stories always end too abruptly for my taste. It's like I only just get into the narrative and get to know the characters, and it's like someone just yells cut and the book ends, and I honestly just end up feeling blue-balled. But honestly, with this short story, I genuinely felt satisfied when I finished. I felt like that ending did make sense. I overall just loved the feel of this book as well. It felt very dreamlike but also daunting. Kind of like one of those dreams you have where you don't really know what's happening, but you kind of have this dread that something's not really right and there's this impending doom that's coming around the corner, but you just kind of roll with it anyways. That's what this book felt like, and it also really gave me chills whilst I was reading it. And call me weird, but I love books that can evoke a physical reaction out of me. The story's also cool because you as a reader can infer your own interpretation of what the story means by the end. Of course, not all people like this, so I'm just flagging it now in case you prefer a plot that's crystal clear. But I liked it so much that once I finished it, I actually started reading it again because I then inferred my own meaning of the story, and then I saw it in a different light the second time around. And genuinely, if a short story can make my favorites video, then you know that I thoroughly enjoyed it. And my next book is also one that I very much thoroughly enjoyed, and that's Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. This is a collection of personal writings taken from the diaries of a Roman emperor around 170 AD, and all of his reflections are rooted in Stoic philosophy, but they all explore these notions around self-discipline and duty and morality, as well as wider themes such as the nature of the universe and the value of undergoing hardship. And again, I rated this book 4 stars because considering this book was written like 2,000 years ago, it's pretty mind-blowing. And it's because all of these things that he wrote about so long ago are still relatable to us today. It was very grounding to see that a lot of his anxieties and fears and worries were very inherently human. They were mainly thoughts about him wanting to be a good person and wanting to help those around him, as well as pondering his place in the universe and really what the meaning of life is. And this is one of the beautiful things about books, is that you can read experiences that you can relate to, or even if they're perhaps new to you, it's interesting to see that humans have been dealing with these same feelings since forever. This was also a very refreshing book to read because you can tell that this author is incredibly intelligent, because this book is literally just a random compilation of texts that someone has pulled out from literally what were his journals. I'm not gonna lie, if someone was to read my journal, I would be so embarrassed because there is just so much dribble in there. But Marcus Aurelius was literally writing masterpieces in his downtime, which, fair play, that is very impressive. I will flag, however, that this book did take me 2 years to read. I was reading other books alongside of it, but like the title of this book suggests, you kind of have to meditate on the things that he's saying. So I was only reading pages here and there just so I could kind of digest what he was saying in my own time. So I just wanted to put that out there in case you're after a page turner, but this is still a very enjoyable book. You just have to have a different reading pace for it. But moving on to something a little bit more modern, my next best book from the last quarter was Beautyland by marie-helene Bertino. This is a quirky coming-of-age novel that follows an alien girl that was sent to Earth as a baby, for the reason that her home planet wanted to study humanity and they wanted her to report back her findings, including humanity's joys and cruelties, relationship dynamics and pop culture, and ultimately what it means to be human, which includes the messy and complicated experience of being alive, as well as exploring belonging and and connection and identity. And like with the other two, I also rated this 4 stars because, not trying to copy the title, but this was a very beautiful book. It mainly revolves around notions of identity and loneliness that comes with being a human today, which I personally resonated with this book, and I'm sure that many others would do too. As she's growing up, she feels very different to the people around her. She can't really understand why. She can't connect to them as the way other people do. Obviously, it's because we know she's an alien, but because it's read through her perspective and you're in her shoes, honestly, it kind of threw me back to being a kid again, where I felt like I couldn't really connect to others around me. And having a character also voice similar experiences when she's an adult was really comforting to read. I was reading online that a lot of people with neurodivergences also very much enjoyed this book because they felt that they could relate to the main character in a way that they didn't expect, more in the way that she processed social interactions and experiences differently to others. I also adored this book because it explored grief and loss in a way that I didn't expect, and how, even as painful as these things are, it's one of the bittersweet things that comes with life. How throughout our lives things are temporary, and the fact things don't last is what gives them meaning. And how, as annoying and overwhelming human emotions and feelings can be, it's also a blessing to be human and experience this joy and love for those around us. And if you know me, I'm just a sucker for any book that explores the human condition. Because whilst I don't come across it on camera, I am a very emotional person, and I just enjoy books that explore things in this way. And my next favourite book also includes aliens, and that's Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This is arguably more of a science fiction novel than the previous one, but this book essentially follows a middle school teacher who is tasked with saving the Earth. He wakes up on a spaceship and slowly remembers that Earth was actually facing a extinction level event because there's a microorganism that's consuming all of the sun's energy, so he goes to space in order to find the solution. And on his journey, he actually runs into an alien friend who he finds out is actually facing the same threat. And I rated this book 4.5 stars, which is genuinely a huge relief considering how long this book was on my TBR list for. I usually get very bored with science fiction books because they are just very science heavy, which I know defeats the purpose of the genre, but I am just not a woman in STEM, okay? I am a humanities girly to my core. But I do enjoy books set in space, so there's a very fine line of books that I would enjoy here. However, even though that this book was full of a lot of science, which admittedly I did slightly skim at times, it was told in an enjoyable and digestible way. But it's also because the main character was very likable and enjoyable to read. It wasn't this dry, here are all the facts, info dumping kind of book, but because the main character is actually a school teacher, he lays out science in a very easy way to understand because he's used to explaining it to kids. The story itself was also very much a page turner. There's constant twists and turns throughout. It's one of those books that chapter after chapter I just wanted to keep reading because I was desperate to know what happened. And also this story was surprisingly emotional because the underlying message is about humans' capacity for cooperation and trust, and how these notions can also transcend to alien life, and I just thought that was so heartfelt and lovely. I will admit though that I did know that Ryan Gosling was going to be cast in the film adaptation before I started reading the book, so I was just imagining him whilst reading it, and I love him as an actor, and I don't know if this affected my judgment of the book. This wasn't 5 stars for me because at times I did find the humour a bit slapstick and obvious and sometimes borderline cringe, but because I think I pictured Ryan Gosling, it then worked a bit better. So I don't know if that clouded my judgment, but oh well. This book was still 4.5 stars, and I hope that you enjoy it too if you read it. But finally, we are on to my last book, which was also my favourite book from the last quarter, and that was Educated by Tara Westover. The book is actually behind me. I think it's like there, so you might be able to see it. This is a memoir written by a woman who has grown up in a strict Mormon family in rural Idaho, and the author's parents basically live off-grid. They reject formal education, modern medicine, and basically anything to do with the government. She grows up knowing very little about the outside world and just believes everything her dad tells her. But she's driven by this curiosity for knowledge and learning more about her surroundings. So she secretly studies and takes exams in order to get into college, and then goes on to higher education to ultimately get a PhD. And of course, I gave this 5 stars, and genuinely think that this was one of my favourite books from 2025. I read this book in October, and I would be lying if I say that I didn't think about this book almost every day. I just think it's one of those stories that will stick with me for life, as it's genuinely one of the most powerful and eye-opening and truly inspiring books I've ever read. And I know that those are some big words, but I truly mean every single one, because this book is just truly that girl. Firstly, it's incredibly well written. You can just tell that the author has this natural talent for storytelling. There was not a single point in her memoir that I felt bored or that I felt like the story was dragging at any point. Secondly, what this woman goes through is so unbelievable. This is is honestly a story about resilience and transformation. And whilst this book does showcase the influential power of education, I would argue that this memoir is more about surviving an abusive family, and in every sense, verbal, emotional, and physical. She grows up in a family that's literally mistrusting of the entire world. They believe that doctors would poison them and schools would brainwash them, and that the government would take them down if they found them living off grid. And also, this is a story of bravery, because the courage it took this woman to question these beliefs and to redefine herself by choosing another path, especially when her family was the only thing that she ever knew in life. You don't need a problematic family as hers to relate to this. I think if anyone who has slightly differing views to their family will be able to connect to this book in any way. But this was just honestly incredible. I would implore everyone to read this book. It was genuinely unbelievable, and it's one of my favorite books I think I've ever read. And on that note of praise, those are my favorite books from the final quarter of 2025. I usually have 8 or 9 books to talk about in these sort of videos, but obviously the last quarter just wasn't strong for me. But hey, that's reading. Which I guess brings me on to the future of my reading for next year. I'll be very honest with you guys, I think I did put quite a lot of pressure on myself to read a lot of books this year, so I had enough content to talk about in my videos. For the last year, I have consistently read 6 books every single month, and it's been very hard to do this because I have an intense job where I have to work overtime. I also spend a lot of time with my family and friends. I travel a lot. So I've fallen into a very bad habit of purposely trying to pick shorter books, which are ones I necessarily didn't want to read, but just so I could hit my 6 books a month target. And therefore putting off books I actually wanted to read just because they were longer, and I felt like I then didn't have enough books to talk about. And therefore I put off longer books I actually did want to read. So next year I'm actually going to be changing that, as one of my New Year's resolutions was to read quality over quantity. So going forward in my monthly reading wrap-up videos, I may not always be reading 6 books. So months I may be reading 6, some months I may be reading 3. But there'll be books I actually want to read, and therefore I think I'll be more passionate about talking to them to you. To be honest, the last year has surprised me when I've been forming this habit of picking up smaller books, because I've never really been someone that's been bothered about reading a certain amount of books. Like, I never set myself specific goals of reading a certain amount of books per year, but I think it's just more come from the fact that I just want to make sure I have enough content to make YouTube videos for you guys, especially when I see other YouTubers read about 100 or 200 books a year, and they obviously have a lot to talk about. But this isn't to blame anyone, this is purely just of the pressure I put on myself, and I need to stop that, basically. Because at the end of the day, I have to remember that I read because I enjoy reading, and I shouldn't feel this pressure to have to measure up to others, and you shouldn't either, even if you find yourself falling victims to the numbers game. But that being said, are you changing any of your reading habits for 2026? Let me know in the comments below. And if not, please let me know what your favorite books from the last quarter was. I'd be interested to know. Obviously, this is my very last video of the year of 2025. If you enjoyed it, please drop a like down below. It really means the world to me. And if you're new here, please subscribe. I make videos chatting about all things books. Feel free to follow me on my socials. I have a Goodreads where I update in real time when I'm reading. And feel free to follow me on my Instagram. I post more personal things on there, but I also post the books I read, letting you know what they're about and what I rated them out of 10. And with that being said, I hope you all have a very happy new year, and wishing you all the best with love and success in 2026. If you're a regular here, I just want to say a special thank you to you for sticking around, because you make making videos enjoyable, and when I read your comments and see your engagement, it really does mean the world to me. I would have quit this YouTube thing a long time ago if it wasn't for the love and warmth that everyone gives me from this channel. And it's about time I wrap this up. So thank you so much, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.